The acrid smell of industrial disinfectant burned my nostrils as I pushed the heavy cleaning cart down the marble corridor of Morrison Tower. Each wheel squeaked in protest against the polished floor, the sound echoing through the empty 23rd floor like a broken record. My lower back ached with the familiar throb that came from 6 hours of scrubbing, mopping, and emptying trash bins, filled with the remnants of lives I'd never live. The digital clock on the wall glowed 2:47 a.m. in harsh red numerals. Another 3 hours until my shift ended. Another 3 hours until I could drag my exhausted body back to my studio apartment and collapse onto the second-hand mattress that served as my bed. The thunder outside rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows, and rain pelted against the glass like angry fists demanding entry. I paused at the executive conference room, extracting my key card from the pocket of my gray uniform. The magnetic lock clicked, and I entered the sanctuary of mahogany and leather that smelled of expensive cologne and power. This room had witnessed deals worth millions, conversations that shaped the city's future, decisions that made or broke lives. I was just the invisible woman who cleaned up after their ambitions. My reflection in the polished conference table showed a woman of 28 who looked older, with dark circles under brown eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. The uniform hung loose on my frame, hiding the curves I'd once been proud of before exhaustion became my constant companion. 3 jobs kept me afloat, barely. Night cleaning at Morrison Tower, morning shifts at a diner on 5th Street, and weekend housekeeping for families in the suburbs who paid cash and didn't ask questions. As I sprayed the table's surface, my mind wandered to the bills stacked on my kitchen counter. Rent was due in 4 days, and I was still $200 short. The electric company had sent their final notice, and my car needed new brakes that I couldn't afford. The American dream felt more like a nightmare when you were living it paycheck to paycheck. The storm intensified, and I moved to the windows to check the latches. The street below was a river of headlights and neon reflections, but something caught my attention near the bus stop across from the building. A small figure huddled against the metal shelter, barely visible through the downpour. I squinted, pressing my face closer to the cold glass. It was a child, a boy who couldn't be more than 7 or 8, sitting alone in the storm with no umbrella, no adult in sight. His dark hair was plastered to his skull, and even from this height, I could see him shivering. My heart clenched. Where were his parents? What kind of person left a child alone at a bus stop in weather like this? I finished cleaning the conference room in record time, my movements sharp with urgency. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt eternal, each floor counting down too slowly. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his newspaper as I approached. "I need to go outside for a minute," I told him, pointing toward the bus stop. "There's a child out there alone." He glanced through the glass doors and shrugged. "Not our problem. Probably just waiting for someone." "In this storm? At 3 a.m? My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. "He's just a little boy." The guard returned to his newspaper with disinterest. I grabbed my jacket from the cleaning cart and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the storm. The rain hit me like a physical blow, soaking through my jacket within seconds. The wind whipped my hair around my face as I ran across the street, dodging the few cars that crawled through the flooded intersection. My cleaning uniform clung to my skin, and my shoes filled with water with each step. The boy looked up as I approached, his face pale and pinched with cold. He had the most beautiful eyes I'd ever seen, deep green like emeralds, framed by dark lashes heavy with raindrops. His clothes were expensive, I noticed, a wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but he was soaked through and shaking uncontrollably. "Hey there," I said softly, crouching down to his level despite the water pooling around my knees. "I'm Julia. What's your name?" He studied me with those remarkable eyes, wariness mixing with desperate hope. "Jake," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Jake, where are your parents? What are you doing out here all alone?" His lower lip trembled, and tears mixed with rainwater on his cheeks. They left me. The bad men came, and everyone ran, and they left me. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I shrugged out of my jacket and wrapped it around his small shoulders, pulling him against my chest. He was so cold, his lips tinged blue, his whole body racked with shivers. "It's okay, Jake. I'm here now. I'm going to take care of you." I looked around desperately. The nearest police station was 6 blocks away, too far to walk in this storm with a hypothermic child. The hospital was closer, but still several blocks. My apartment was only 2 blocks north, warm and dry. "Jake, I live very close. We're going to go to my place and get you warm and dry, okay? Then we'll figure out how to find your family." He nodded against my chest, his small fist clutching my shirt. I lifted him easily, his weight negligible against my body strengthened by years of physical labor. His head nestled against my neck, and I felt his breath warm against my skin. The walk to my apartment building felt like miles. Each step was a battle against the wind and rain, my shoes slipping on the slick sidewalk. Jake's body gradually warmed against mine, but he remained silent, his trust absolute despite having known me for only minutes. My building was a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that gentrification hadn't yet discovered. The lobby smelled of industrial cleaner and the faint mustiness of old pipes. Nothing like the luxury towers I cleaned. I climbed 3 flights of stairs, my legs burning from the extra weight and the adrenaline beginning to fade. My studio apartment was small but clean, furnished with pieces I'd collected from thrift stores and curb finds. A Murphy bed dominated one wall, currently folded up to reveal my tiny living space. The kitchenette consisted of a hot plate, mini fridge, and microwave balanced on a card table. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I set Jake down gently and immediately turned up the heat, then rushed to find dry clothes. I had an oversized sweater that would serve as a dress for him, and thick socks that would warm his feet. While he changed in the small bathroom, I heated water for hot chocolate and soup, whatever I could find in my meager pantry. When he emerged, swimming in my clothes, he looked even younger and more vulnerable. I guided him to the small couch and wrapped him in every blanket I owned, then pressed a steaming mug into his small hands. "Better?" I asked, sitting beside him. He nodded, some color returning to his pale cheeks. "Thank you for saving me." The simple words gutted me. No child should have to thank someone for basic human decency, for not leaving them alone in a storm. "Jake, can you tell me about your family? What happened tonight?" His green eyes darkened with memory and fear. "Daddy had to leave fast. The bad men came to our house with guns. Marco and Tony were supposed to take me to the safe place, but they got scared and left me at the bus stop. They said Daddy would come get me, but he didn't." My blood ran cold. Guns? Safe places? What kind of family was this child from? "What's your daddy's name, Jake?" He looked at me with those innocent eyes and spoke a name that made my world tilt on its axis. "James Moretti. My daddy is James Moretti." I nearly dropped my own mug. Everyone in the city knew that name, whispered in fear and respect. James Moretti controlled everything that happened in the shadows. The man who owned judges and police commissioners, whose word was law in the underworld that operated parallel to normal society. And I was sitting in my apartment with his 7-year-old son. "Jake," I managed, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "We need to call your daddy. Do you know his phone number?" He recited a number that I wrote on the back of an envelope with shaking hands. This was insane. I was about to call the most dangerous man in the city to tell him I had his child. But looking at Jake, still shivering despite the blankets, still trusting me completely, I knew I had no choice. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, cold and sharp as a blade. "Who is this?" "Mr. Moretti?" "My name is Julia Santos. I have your son." The silence that followed was deafening. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. "If you've harmed him in any way, I will find you, and you will beg for death before I'm finished." "He's safe," I said quickly. "I found him at a bus stop during the storm. He was alone and scared. I brought him to my apartment to get him warm and dry. Put him on the phone." I handed the phone to Jake, who immediately brightened. "Daddy, the lady saved me from the storm. Julia's really nice and she made me hot chocolate." I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Jake's face grew serious as he listened. "Okay, Daddy, I'll wait here." He handed the phone back to me. "Miss Santos." The voice was different now, still controlled but lacking the earlier threat. "I'm sending men to collect my son. They'll be there in 10 minutes. I'll keep him safe until then." "Miss Santos?" He paused, and I heard something that might have been emotion beneath the steel. "Thank you." The line went dead. I looked at Jake, who was watching me with curious eyes. "Daddy's sending Uncle Marcus to get me, but I don't want to leave yet. I like it here." My heart clenched. In the space of an hour, this little boy had carved out a place in my chest that I didn't know existed. The thought of him returning to a world of guns and safe houses and people who abandoned children made me want to fight something. Anything. Exactly 10 minutes later, a knock echoed through my apartment, firm and authoritative. I opened the door to find 2 men in expensive suits, their eyes scanning my small space with professional efficiency. The larger one, built like a linebacker with graying temples, stepped forward. "Miss Santos? I'm Marcus Romano. We're here for Jake." Jake jumped up from the couch, running to the man with obvious affection. "Uncle Marcus, Julia saved me from the storm." Marcus's stern expression softened as he looked down at the boy. "I know, kiddo. Your dad is very grateful." He looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. He's waiting in the car." My blood turned to ice water. "The car? He wants to thank you personally." Somehow, I doubted it would be that simple. But refusing wasn't an option when dealing with James Moretti. I grabbed my still damp jacket and followed them down to the street. A black Mercedes sedan idled at the curb, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the interior. Marcus opened the rear door, and I found myself face to face with the man whose name struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. James Moretti was younger than I'd expected, perhaps mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of classical Italian features that belonged in Renaissance paintings. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, pale blue like winter ice, studying me with an intensity that made me feel transparent. "Get in," he said simply. I slid into the leather seat, hyper-aware of the luxury surrounding me, the new car smell mixed with expensive cologne and something else, something that spoke of power and danger. Jake climbed in beside me, immediately snuggling against my side as if I were his anchor in a storm-tossed world. The gesture wasn't lost on his father, whose eyes tracked every movement. "Daddy, Julia's the best. She has hot chocolate and blankets, and she didn't leave me in the rain." Something flickered across James's face, too quick to interpret. "No, she didn't leave you." His gaze fixed on me. "Why?" The question was simple, but I sensed everything hung on my answer. Because he's a child who needed help. Because leaving him there wasn't an option. Most people would have called the police and walked away. I'm not most people. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No, you're not." The car glided through the empty streets while Jake dozed against my shoulder, exhausted by the night's events. James watched us both with those calculating eyes, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "You work at Morrison Tower," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Night shift cleaning crew, 3 jobs total, studio apartment on Elm Street. No family, no significant relationships. Clean criminal record. My spine stiffened. You had me investigated? Already? I investigate everyone who comes into contact with my son. His voice held no apology. You saved him tonight. That makes you important. I just did what anyone would do. No. His tone was final. You did what very few would do. You risked your safety for a stranger's child. That kind of character is rare. The car pulled up outside an imposing mansion in the hills, all stone and iron gates and security cameras. This was a different world from my converted warehouse apartment, a world of power and privilege and violence lurking beneath beautiful surfaces. Daddy, is Julia coming inside? Can she see my room? James studied me with those pale eyes. Would you like to see the inside? Jake would enjoy showing you around. It was another test, I realized. Everything with this man was a test. If Jake wants to show me, I'd like that. The mansion's interior was stunning, all marble and crystal and artwork that probably cost more than I'd earn in a lifetime. But I noticed the security cameras, the men positioned strategically throughout the house, the weight of protection and paranoia that shadowed beauty. Jake's room was a little boy's paradise, filled with toys and books, and a bed large enough for 3 children. But it felt lonely somehow. Too perfect, like a display in a museum, rather than a space where a child truly lived. Do you like it? Jake asked eagerly. It's wonderful. You're a very lucky boy. Sometimes I get scared at night. The house is so big and quiet. My heart clenched. All the toys and luxury in the world couldn't replace what this child really needed. Warmth and safety, and someone who would never leave him in a storm. James appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he watched Jake show me his treasures. Jake, it's time for bed. Miss Santos needs to go home. But I want her to stay. Can she read me a story? Jake. The gentle warning in his father's voice was unmistakable. I knelt down to Jake's level, brushing his dark hair back from his forehead. I have to go, sweetheart. But maybe I'll see you again soon. Promise? I looked up at James, finding something unexpected in those cold eyes. I promise I'll try. Jake hugged me tightly, his small arms fierce around my neck. Thank you for saving me, Julia. I love you. The words hit me like a physical blow, this innocent declaration from a child who'd known me for only hours. When I looked up, James was studying us both with an expression I couldn't read. He walked me to the front door personally, a courtesy that felt significant in this house of protocols and hierarchies. Miss Santos. He paused, his hand on the door handle. I owe you a debt. You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone should do. I told you, you're not anyone. His pale eyes held mine. I don't forget debts, especially ones involving my son. You'll hear from me again. The black Mercedes was waiting to take me home, but as I rode through the pre-dawn streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't begin to understand. The lonely little boy with green eyes had found a place in my heart, and his dangerous father had made a promise that sounded more like a threat. I was still wearing Jake's trust like a warm blanket around my shoulders, still hearing his innocent, I love you, echoing in my mind. Whatever came next, I knew there was no going back to the simple anonymity of my old life. The storm had passed, but something told me the real tempest was just beginning. The next morning arrived too soon, dragging me from dreams filled with green eyes and storm-soaked promises. My alarm clock shrieked at 6:30 a.m., reminding me that the city diner on 5th Street didn't care if I'd spent half the night rescuing Mafia princes. I rolled out of bed, my body protesting every movement, and stumbled to the shower that barely produced lukewarm water. The bathroom mirror reflected a woman who looked like she'd been hit by a truck. My eyes were puffy from the few hours of restless sleep, and my auburn hair stuck up at impossible angles. But underneath the exhaustion, something had changed. I touched my lips, remembering Jake's fierce hug, the way he'd trusted me completely despite being a stranger. By 7:15, I was pushing through the glass doors of Mel's diner, tying my apron around my waist and forcing my face into the cheerful expression that earned better tips. The breakfast rush was already building, construction workers and office employees grabbing coffee and eggs before their day began. "You look like hell, honey," called Rosa from behind the grill, her Spanish accent thick with concern. She'd been working at Mel's for 15 years, longer than I'd lived in the city, and had appointed herself my unofficial mother figure. "Long night," I replied, grabbing the coffee pot and starting my rounds. "That cleaning job again? I keep telling you, mija, there's gotta be better work than scrubbing rich people's offices." If only she knew what I'd done with my night, instead of scrubbing. I poured coffee for a businessman who barely looked up from his phone, accepted his grunted thanks, and moved to the next table. The morning flew by in a blur of orders and dirty dishes. By noon, my feet ached in the sensible shoes I couldn't afford to replace, and my uniform smelled like bacon grease and desperation. I was refilling the sugar dispensers when Rosa called out, "Julia, someone's here to see you." I looked up to find Marcus Romano standing by the front door, his expensive suit completely out of place among the cracked vinyl booths and faded linoleum. Every conversation in the diner had stopped, the working-class customers instinctively recognizing a predator in their midst. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked over, untying my apron with hands that weren't quite steady. "Miss Santos." Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. I'm working. He's waiting outside." Through the window, I could see the black Mercedes sedan idling at the curb, tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Several other patrons had noticed it too, their faces tight with the kind of wariness that came from living in neighborhoods where expensive cars usually meant trouble. "I get off at 3, I said quietly. He's a patient man, but not infinitely so. The underlying threat was clear. I looked back at Rosa, who was watching with worried eyes, then at the handful of customers who were pretending not to eavesdrop. 5 minutes, I told Marcus. I need to explain to my boss. Rosa's face went pale when I approached the service window. "Mija, what have you gotten yourself into?" "It's complicated. I helped someone last night and now." I trailed off, unsure how to explain something I didn't fully understand myself. "That's not just someone out there. That's the kind of car that brings flowers to funerals." "I know, but I have to go." Rosa crossed herself, murmuring a prayer in rapid Spanish. "Be careful, Julia. Some favors cost more than you can afford to pay." The interior of the Mercedes was just as intimidating in daylight, all leather and tinted glass and the subtle scent of power. James Moretti sat in the far corner, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His pale blue eyes tracked my movements as I settled into the seat across from him. "Miss Santos, I trust you slept well?" "Well enough." I smoothed my diner uniform, suddenly conscious of the coffee stains and rumpled fabric. "How's Jake?" Something shifted in his expression, surprised perhaps that my first question was about his son, rather than why he'd summoned me. "He's well. He asked about you this morning, several times. He's a sweet boy. He's also a lonely boy. The admission seemed to cost him something. His mother died when he was 4. Since then it's been just him and me, plus the people who work for us. He doesn't often form attachments to outsiders. I'm sorry for your loss." He nodded curtly, filing away my sympathy like information to be catalogued. "Jake has taken a liking to you, Miss Santos. That presents both an opportunity and a problem." "What kind of opportunity?" "My son needs stability, a consistent female presence in his life. Someone who won't abandon him when things become complicated." The way he said complicated made ice form in my veins. And the problem? You live in a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. You work 3 jobs to barely make ends meet. Your life is... He paused, searching for the right word. Unstable. Heat flared in my cheeks. My life is honest. I work hard for everything I have. I'm not questioning your integrity. I'm questioning your circumstances. He leaned forward slightly, his attention laser-focused on my face. I have a proposition for you. I'm listening. I need a live-in housekeeper, someone to manage my home, prepare meals, and help care for Jake. The position comes with a generous salary, full benefits, and living quarters in my house. My mouth went dry. You want me to move into your house? The position would be strictly professional. You would have your own suite of rooms, complete privacy. Your only responsibilities would be maintaining the household and spending time with Jake when I'm away on business. Which is how often? Frequently. I stared out the window at the diner where Rosa was probably watching for my return, worrying about whether I'd come back in one piece. The contrast between my current life and what he was offering was staggering. Why me? You could hire any number of qualified housekeepers. Jake trusts you. In my world, trust is the rarest commodity. His pale eyes held mine. Last night, you risked your safety for my son without knowing who he was or what you might gain from it. That kind of character can't be bought. And if I say no, then you return to your 3 jobs and your studio apartment, and Jake loses the first person outside our organization that he's truly connected with. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. But you won't say no. The arrogance in his voice sparked my temper. You seem very sure of that. Because I've done my research, Miss Santos. You send money to your sister in Phoenix every month, even when you can barely afford your own rent. You volunteer at the community center on your days off, reading to children whose parents are too busy or too absent to do it themselves. You're exactly the kind of person who can't turn her back on a 7-year-old boy who needs her. The accuracy of his assessment was unnerving. He'd obviously had me thoroughly investigated, probably knew my financial situation better than I did. The salary, I said carefully. What kind of generous are we talking about? He named a figure that made my breath catch. It was more than I made at all 3 jobs combined. Enough to pay off my debts and maybe even save some money for the first time in years. That's very generous. I take care of what's mine, Miss Santos. If you accept this position, you become part of my household, under my protection. That means certain securities, but also certain responsibilities. What kind of responsibilities? Discretion, loyalty, understanding that what happens in my home stays in my home. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I cannot tolerate betrayal, Miss Santos. Not from anyone, especially not from someone I allow close to my son. The threat was clear as crystal. I was being offered a golden cage, beautiful and comfortable, but still a cage nonetheless. I need time to think about it. Of course, but not too much time. Jake is expecting you for dinner tonight. I didn't agree to that. You didn't disagree either. He pressed a button, and the car began to move. Marcus will pick you up at 6. Dress casually. Jake is excited to show you his train set. The Mercedes glided through traffic with the smooth efficiency of money and power. I watched the city pass by through tinted windows, thinking about how different the world looked when you weren't walking through it with aching feet and empty pockets. Miss Santos. James's voice broke into my thoughts. I should mention that accepting my offer comes with certain protections. Your previous employers would be compensated for the loss of your services. Your rent and utilities would be handled until your lease expires. Any outstanding debts would be resolved. You'd pay off my debts? Consider it a signing bonus. It was too much, too easy. What's the catch? The catch is that once you're part of my household, you're part of my world. That world has rules, Miss Santos. Some of them may be difficult for someone with your moral flexibility. My moral flexibility? You believe in right and wrong. In my world, those concepts are more fluid. Sometimes protecting the people you care about requires making choices that aren't strictly legal. The honesty was more terrifying than any threat. He was telling me plainly that he existed outside the law, that accepting his offer meant accepting that reality. The car stopped outside my apartment building. Marcus appeared at the door before I could reach for the handle. 6 o'clock, Miss Santos, James said as I stepped onto the sidewalk. Don't disappoint my son. I stood on the curb, watching the Mercedes disappear into traffic, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been a nobody, invisible in my gray cleaning uniform. Now I was being courted by one of the most dangerous men in the city. Back in my apartment, I stared at the bills on my kitchen counter, the eviction notice, the threatening letters from creditors. Then I thought about Jake's green eyes, the way he'd trusted me completely, the loneliness I'd seen in his beautiful room. My phone rang, displaying Rosa's number. Mija, please tell me you're okay. I'm okay, Rosa. What did that man want? I sank onto my secondhand couch, suddenly exhausted. He offered me a job. What kind of job? Housekeeper, live-in position. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Julia, Rosa's voice was carefully controlled. Men like that don't offer jobs. They offer contracts, and the payment always comes due. It's good money, Rosa. Really good money. Some prices are too high, no matter how much they're offering. But what if it's not? What if it's just a job and I'm overthinking it? Then why do you sound like you're trying to convince yourself? I didn't have an answer for that. At 5:45, I stood in front of my tiny closet, trying to decide what dress casually meant when you were going to a mansion. I settled on dark jeans and a blue sweater that brought out my eyes, my one decent pair of shoes that weren't meant for work. Marcus was waiting exactly at 6, leaning against the Mercedes like he had all the time in the world. The ride to the mansion was silent, giving me time to observe the neighborhoods we passed through. From my working-class area with its convenience stores and bus stops, through the middle-class suburbs with their modest houses and chain restaurants, finally into the hills where money lived behind gates and hedges. Jake was waiting at the front door when we arrived, practically bouncing with excitement. He'd changed from whatever expensive outfit he'd worn to school into jeans and a Spider-Man t-shirt, looking like any other 7-year-old boy. Julia, you came! Daddy said you might not want to come for dinner, but I knew you would. He launched himself into my arms and I caught him easily, spinning him around until he giggled. The sound was pure joy, and I felt something inside my chest crack open a little wider. Of course I came. You promised to show me your train set. It's so cool. Daddy got it from Germany, and it has real steam and everything. James appeared in the doorway, still dressed in his work clothes, but with his tie loosened and his sleeves rolled up. The casual gesture made him look younger, more approachable, though his eyes still held that calculating intelligence. Miss Santos, welcome to our home. The emphasis on our wasn't lost on me. He was already claiming me, already acting as if my acceptance was a foregone conclusion. Dinner was served in a dining room that could have seated 20, but felt intimate with just the 3 of us at one end of the massive table. Jake chattered throughout the meal, telling me about school and his friends and the new book his tutor was reading with him. Do you like to read, Julia? He asked, cutting his chicken with the careful precision of a child learning proper manners. I love to read. What's your favorite book? I like the one about the mouse who was brave. He was little, but he saved everyone. That sounds like a wonderful story. Daddy reads to me sometimes, but he's really busy with work. Do you think you could read to me? If you moved in, I mean? I glanced at James, who was watching this exchange with unreadable eyes. We'll see, sweetheart. After dinner, Jake gave me the promised tour of his train set, an elaborate display that took up an entire room on the second floor. Model buildings and tiny people populated a miniature world where trains ran on schedule and everything was perfectly controlled. Daddy says when I'm older I can help him with his real business, but I don't really know what his business is. What do you think he does? Jake shrugged with the casual indifference of childhood. Important stuff. People are always calling him, and sometimes they come to the house to talk about serious things, but he always makes time for me when I need him. The simple statement revealed more about James Moretti than any investigation could have uncovered. Whatever else he was a devoted father. It's getting late. James's voice came from the doorway. Time for bed, Jake. But Julia just got here. Julia will still be here when you wake up. I started to protest, to remind him that I hadn't agreed to anything, but Jake's hopeful face stopped me. Will you, Julia? Will you be here for breakfast? I looked at James, finding something that might have been vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior. Yes, I heard myself say. I'll be here for breakfast. After Jake was tucked into bed, James led me to a study lined with books and dominated by a massive desk. He poured himself a scotch and offered me wine, which I declined. You're very good with him, he said, settling into a leather chair that probably cost more than my car. He's easy to love. Is he? Or are you just someone who loves easily? The question caught me off guard. I don't know. I've never really thought about it. You should. In my world, loving easily can be dangerous. Why? Because it gives people power over you. Jake loves easily too. It worries me. I studied his face, seeing past the cold mask to the concerned father beneath. You can't protect him from caring about people. Can I? Not without destroying the best parts of who he is. Something flickered in those pale eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I'd challenged him so directly. You have opinions, Miss Santos. I have experience. I know what it's like to grow up without love. It leaves marks that never really heal. And what makes you think Jake is growing up without love? I don't, but I think he's growing up lonely, and there's a difference. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken truths. The guest suite is prepared for you, he said finally. Marcus will bring your things tomorrow. I haven't said yes yet, haven't you? He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city spread below. You told my son you'd be here for breakfast. You let him show you his most precious possessions. You're already emotionally invested, Miss Santos. The rest is just paperwork. I hated that he was right. Somewhere between Jake's trusting hug and his excited chatter about trains, I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. This is happening very fast. In my experience, the best decisions usually do. He turned from the window, studying me with those penetrating eyes. Life is about calculated risks, Miss Santos. I'm offering you security, purpose, a chance to make a real difference in a child's life. The question is whether you're brave enough to take it. And if I'm not? If I decide this is too much, too complicated? Then Jake loses someone else he cares about, and you go back to cleaning offices for people who don't even see you. His voice was matter of fact, but I caught the underlying steel. But somehow, I don't think you're the kind of woman who runs from challenges. He was manipulating me, using my feelings for Jake and my own insecurities to guide me toward the choice he wanted. The smart thing would be to walk away, to return to my simple, safe, poverty-stricken life. But smart didn't always win out over need, and I needed to matter to someone. I needed to be more than invisible. The guest suite, I said quietly. I'd like to see it." His smile was small but genuine. "Of course. Consider it a trial run." As he led me through corridors lined with expensive art and fresh flowers, I wondered if I was being rescued or captured. The distinction seemed less clear with every step I took deeper into James Moretti's world. The guest suite was larger than my entire apartment, with a sitting room, bedroom, and private bathroom that belonged in a luxury hotel. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking gardens that were probably worth more than most people's houses. "Will this be adequate?" James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "It's beautiful." "Good. Breakfast is at 7. Jake will be excited to see you." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Santos, Julia, welcome to the family." As the door closed behind him, I sank into a chair that was softer than my bed at home and tried to process what had just happened. In the space of 2 days, I'd gone from complete anonymity to being welcomed into the home of the most dangerous man in the city. Outside my window, the gardens were lit by subtle landscape lighting, creating a fairy tale setting that felt as unreal as everything else in my new life. I thought about Jake sleeping down the hall, probably dreaming of trains and stories, and the woman who'd promised to be there for breakfast. Whatever I'd gotten myself into, there was no going back now. I was part of James Moretti's world, under his protection and subject to his rules. The only question was whether that would be my salvation or my destruction. I woke in Egyptian cotton sheets so soft they felt like whispered promises against my skin, momentarily disoriented by the absence of traffic noise and sirens that usually marked my mornings. Sunlight filtered through curtains that probably cost more than my monthly rent, casting golden patterns across a room that belonged in architectural magazines. For a moment, I lay still, letting the reality settle over me like morning fog. I was in James Moretti's house, in a bed that could accommodate 4 people, surrounded by luxury I'd only seen in movies. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 6:30 a.m., giving me 30 minutes before I was expected downstairs for breakfast with Jake. The bathroom was a marvel of marble and brass, with a shower large enough for a small party and towels so thick they could have been blankets. I stood under water pressure that actually worked, using shampoo that smelled like expensive flowers instead of the generic brand I bought at the corner store. My reflection in the mirror looked strange, sleep soft features framed by auburn hair that actually had some shine for once thanks to the quality products. The blue sweater from last night hung on a hook beside the shower, and I realized Marcus must have retrieved my things while I slept. The thought of strangers in my apartment, packing my life into boxes, made my stomach clench with unease. By 6:55, I was making my way down the grand staircase, my hand trailing along a banister polished to mirror perfection. The house felt different in morning light, less intimidating but more overwhelming. Artwork lined the walls, pieces I recognized from art history classes I'd taken years ago when I dreamed of a different life. Jake's laughter echoed from the kitchen, bright and infectious, drawing me forward like a beacon. I found him sitting at a breakfast bar, still in Spider-Man pajamas, swinging his legs while a woman I hadn't met before prepared what looked like fresh fruit and homemade pancakes. "Julia!" Jake scrambled down from his chair and launched himself at me, his small arms wrapping around my waist with fierce affection. "You stayed. I told Daddy you would, but he said maybe you changed your mind." "I told you I'd be here for breakfast," I said, smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead. "I keep my promises." The woman at the stove turned, revealing a kind face lined with years of service and wisdom. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Miss Santos," she said with a slight Irish accent. "I'm Margaret O'Brien, but everyone calls me Maggie. I manage the household staff." "It's nice to meet you, Maggie." "Jake's been talking about you since he woke up. Actually, he's been talking about you since yesterday evening. Julia this, Julia that. Her eyes sparkled with gentle amusement. It's been quite refreshing, actually. He doesn't usually take to strangers so quickly. Julia's not a stranger, Jake protested, climbing back onto his chair. She's family now, right, Julia? The word family hung in the air between us, weighted with hope and expectation. I glanced at Maggie, who was watching this exchange with interest. We'll see, sweetheart. For now, I'm just visiting. But you'll stay for a long time? Daddy said you might live here and help take care of me. James's voice came from the doorway before I could answer. Good morning. I trust you slept well? He was dressed for business in another perfectly tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with a silver tie that brought out his pale eyes. His dark hair was still damp from his shower, and he carried himself with the casual confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Very well, thank you. Daddy, look. Maggie made pancakes shaped like trains. James moved to ruffle his son's hair, the gesture so natural and affectionate it caught me off guard. Whatever else he was, he genuinely loved his child. Eat up then. Marcus will drive you to school in 20 minutes. Can Julia come too? I want to show her my classroom. Julia has things to discuss with me this morning. Perhaps another time. Jake's face fell slightly, but he nodded with the resignation of a child accustomed to adult priorities. I found myself wanting to promise him that yes, I'd love to see his classroom. But James's steady gaze warned me to be careful about commitments I might not be able to keep. Breakfast was a surreal experience, sitting in a kitchen that belonged in a magazine spread, eating food prepared by staff while Jake chattered about his upcoming science project. James read something on his tablet, occasionally commenting on Jake's stories with the distracted attention of a busy parent. It felt almost normal, this domestic tableau, except for the security cameras in every corner, and the way James's phone buzzed constantly with messages that made his jaw tighten. After Jake left for school with Marcus, the house fell into a different kind of quiet. James led me to his study, the same room where we'd talked the night before, but it felt more imposing in daylight. Coffee, he offered, moving to a sidebar that held a professional-grade espresso machine. Please. He prepared 2 cups with practiced efficiency, the domestic act at odds with his expensive suit and the power that radiated from him like heat from a furnace. You have questions, he said, settling behind his desk while I took the chair across from him. Several. Ask them. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, using the moment to gather my thoughts. Last night you mentioned discretion and loyalty. What exactly does that mean? It means that what you see and hear in this house stays in this house. I conduct business from my home office sometimes. You might overhear conversations, see people come and go. You would be expected to forget whatever you witness that doesn't directly concern you. And if what I witness concerns illegal activities? His pale eyes sharpened. I'm a businessman, Julia. I own legitimate enterprises across the city. Real estate, restaurants, construction companies, all perfectly legal. That's not what I asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, it isn't. You're more direct than I expected. You're asking me to move into your house to help raise your son. I think I deserve honesty. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with those calculating eyes. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I operate in gray areas sometimes. Business occasionally requires flexible interpretations of certain regulations. I've never killed anyone who didn't deserve it, never harmed an innocent, never involved children in my business. The casual admission of murder should have sent me running for the door. Instead, I found myself asking, who decides who deserves it? I do. And you're qualified to make that judgment? More qualified than most. His tone suggested the topic was closed. The question is whether you can live with that reality. I thought about Jake's trusting face, the loneliness I'd seen in his beautiful room, the way he'd clung to me like I was his anchor in a storm-tossed world. If I stay, Jake would be my priority. Not your business, not your gray areas, just Jake. That's all I'm asking for. And if someday those worlds collide, if your business puts him in danger, something dark flashed in his eyes. That will never happen. I've made sure of it. How can you be certain? Because anyone who threatens my son dies. Slowly. The matter-of-fact delivery made the threat more chilling than if he'd shouted it. Jake is the most important thing in my world, Julia. Everything else exists to protect him. I believed him. The love for his son was the most real thing about James Moretti, the crack in his armor that revealed the man beneath the dangerous facade. The salary you mentioned, I said, changing subjects. It's more than I'd make in a year at my current jobs. You'll earn every penny. Jake is. Challenging sometimes. He's intelligent, curious, and completely fearless. He needs someone who can match his energy while keeping him safe. Safe from what? From making the kind of mistakes that 7-year-old boys make. From wandering too far from the house. From trusting the wrong people. His gaze intensified. From feeling abandoned again. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a heavy coat. I would be responsible for this child's emotional well-being, for filling the void left by his mother's death and his father's dangerous lifestyle. There would be rules, James continued, protocols you'd need to follow, such as security briefings every morning. You'd need to inform Marcus of any plans to leave the property. Jake is never to be alone with anyone who hasn't been vetted by my security team. That sounds like a prison. It's protection. There are people who would hurt Jake to get to me. I won't allow that to happen. What about my life? My friends? My family? Your sister in Phoenix? You could visit her whenever you wanted, with appropriate security. As for friends... He paused, consulting his tablet. Rosa Martinez from the diner seems genuinely concerned about your welfare. She could visit here once she's been cleared. The casual mention of Rosa's full name reminded me how thoroughly I'd been investigated. James probably knew more about my life than I remembered myself. This feels like you're buying me, I said quietly. I'm offering you a position with excellent compensation and benefits. If that feels like being bought, perhaps you should examine why. The barb hit home because there was truth in it. I was poor enough that the salary he offered felt like winning the lottery, desperate enough that the security he provided seemed like salvation. I want to see the contract, I said. Of course. He slid a leather folder across the desk. My lawyers have prepared standard employment documents. Nothing unusual. I opened the folder to find papers printed on heavy stock, the kind of formal documents that meant serious business. The salary figure made my breath catch all over again, but it was the benefits package that truly stunned me. Health insurance, dental, vision, life insurance, retirement contributions, things I'd never been able to afford. This is very generous. I take care of my people, Julia. The question is whether you want to be one of them. I thought about my studio apartment with its broken heater and thin walls, the 3 jobs that barely kept me afloat, the constant worry about money that had become background noise in my life. Then I thought about Jake's green eyes, the way he'd trusted me completely, the loneliness that had echoed in his excited chatter. If I sign this, when would you want me to start? Today. Your belongings have already been moved to your suite. Your former employers have been compensated for the short notice. Your lease has been settled. You were very confident I'd say yes. I'm a good judge of character. Julia, you're not the kind of woman who walks away from a child in need. He was right, and we both knew it. From the moment Jake had hugged me and called me family, my decision had been made. Everything else was just negotiation. The other staff, I said. How do they feel about a new person joining the household? Maggie is pleased. She's been managing too much since Mrs. Kowalski retired last month. The security team is neutral as long as you follow protocols. The cleaning staff rarely interacts with family members anyway. Family members? That's how Jake sees you. That's how you'll be treated. The word carried weight in this house, I realized. Family meant protection, privilege, but also responsibility and loyalty. There's something else you should know, James said, his tone becoming more serious. My business sometimes requires me to travel on short notice. When that happens, you would be Jake's primary caregiver. Are you prepared for that responsibility? I think so. I've been taking care of myself for a long time. This is different. Jake isn't just any 7-year-old. He's James Moretti's son. That makes him valuable to my enemies and vulnerable to people who would use him to hurt me. How often do you travel? Once or twice a month, usually for 2 or 3 days. Marcus and the security team would still be here, of course, but Jake responds better to you than to any of them. He barely knows me. He knows enough. Children have good instincts about people, better than adults sometimes. Jake sees something in you that he needs. I thought about my old life, the loneliness of coming home to an empty apartment, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs just to survive. Then I imagined mornings like this one, Jake's laughter filling beautiful rooms, the security of knowing there would always be enough money for food and medicine and heat. The contract, I said. Is there a probationary period? 30 days. If either party is unsatisfied, you're free to leave with a generous severance package. And Jake? How do we explain it to him if I decide to leave? We don't, because you won't. The certainty in his voice was absolute. You're already attached to him, Julia. You wouldn't break his heart by leaving. Again, he was right. The thought of disappointing Jake, of being another adult who abandoned him, made my chest ache with an emotion I didn't want to examine too closely. I'll need access to a car, I said. If I'm going to be responsible for Jake, I need independence. There's a BMW in the garage you can use. Marcus will show you this afternoon. I don't know how to drive anything that expensive. You'll learn. Is there anything else? I stared at the contract, at the signature line that would change my life forever. This feels too good to be true. In my experience, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Perhaps your experience has been limited to people who don't value what you have to offer. And what is that exactly? Kindness? Loyalty? The ability to love without expecting anything in return. His pale eyes met mine. Those qualities are rarer than you might think. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For a moment, the dangerous businessman facade slipped, revealing something almost vulnerable beneath. Julia. His voice was softer now, less commanding. Jake hasn't smiled as much in the past 2 days as he had in the previous 2 months. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're giving him, it's working. That's worth more to me than any amount of money. The admission hung between us, raw and honest. This wasn't just about hiring a housekeeper. This was about saving his son from the loneliness that came with being the child of a man like James Moretti. I picked up the pen, its weight heavier than it should have been. If I do this, I said slowly, I need your word that Jake's welfare comes first. Not your business, not your convenience. Jake. You have it. And I need honesty. Not complete transparency about your business, but honesty about anything that affects him. Or me. Agreed. I signed my name on the contract, each letter feeling like a step off a cliff into unknown territory. James countered with his own signature, his handwriting bold and decisive. Welcome to the family, Julia. The words should have felt like celebration, but instead they felt like the closing of a cage door. Beautiful, comfortable, and secure, but still a cage. When does Jake get home from school? I asked. 3:30. He'll be excited to hear you're staying. And you? Are you excited? The question slipped out before I could stop it, more personal than I'd intended. James studied me for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his pale eyes. I'm satisfied, he said finally. Satisfaction is a luxury in my line of work. It wasn't quite an answer, but it was all I was going to get. I stood, smoothing my hands over the jeans that suddenly felt too casual for my new position. I should probably change. If I'm going to be part of your household staff, I should look the part. You're not staff, Julia. You're family. Dress however makes you comfortable. The distinction mattered to him, I realized. In his world, family was sacred, separate from the business that defined everything else. I'll let Maggie show me around properly then. Learn where everything is. She's expecting you. But Julia? I paused at the door. Thank you. For Jake. For last night. For this. I know it's not easy coming into a situation like this. No, I agreed. It's not. But neither was watching a 7-year-old boy shiver alone in a storm. His smile was small but genuine. No, I suppose it wasn't. As I left his study, I caught my reflection in the mirror that hung in the hallway. The woman looking back at me was the same one who'd scrubbed floors 12 hours ago. But everything else had changed. I was Julia Santos, member of the Moretti household, surrogate mother to a lonely little boy, and under the protection of one of the most dangerous men in the city. I should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The feeling was almost worth the price I suspected I'd eventually have to pay. 3 weeks into my new life, I was beginning to understand the rhythm of the Moretti household. Mornings started with Jake's laughter echoing through the kitchen, while Maggie prepared breakfast with the efficiency of a woman who'd been managing households longer than I'd been alive. James would appear precisely at 7:15, already dressed for whatever battles awaited him in his business world, his attention focused on his son during the brief window before responsibilities claimed him. The routine should have felt restrictive, but instead, it was comforting. For the first time in years, I woke up without the crushing weight of financial anxiety, without wondering if I'd have enough money for groceries or whether the electricity would be shut off. Julia, can you help me with my science project? Jake asked on a Thursday morning, syrup from Maggie's homemade pancakes sticky on his chin. We're supposed to build something that shows how plants grow. What did you have in mind? I asked, settling beside him at the breakfast bar. Maybe we could plant seeds in different kinds of soil. Marcus said there's a garden behind the house where we could dig up dirt. James looked up from his tablet, raising an eyebrow. Marcus said that, did he? He also said he'd help us find worms. Jake added with the enthusiasm only a 7-year-old could muster for invertebrates. I'm sure he did. James's dry tone suggested he'd be having words with his head of security about volunteering for gardening duty. It sounds like a great project, I interjected. We could set up different containers in the sunroom, maybe chart the growth rates. Jake's face lit up. Really? You know about plants? A little. I used to help my grandmother in her garden when I was your age. It was a small truth, one of the few warm memories from my childhood. My grandmother had died when I was 10, leaving me with my sister Elena and parents who were too busy fighting each other to notice their daughters slipping through the cracks. Did she teach you about flowers too? Jake pressed. I want to plant flowers for Mommy. Daddy says she liked roses. The innocent statement created a moment of profound silence. James's expression closed off, the way it always did when Jake mentioned his mother. I'd learned to recognize the signs, the tightening around his eyes that spoke of grief still too raw to examine. Red roses, James said quietly. She liked red roses. Then we'll definitely include those in our garden, I promised Jake, earning a grateful look from his father. After Jake left for school with Marcus, I found myself alone with James in the kitchen. a rare occurrence since he usually departed for his office immediately after breakfast. Today he lingered, nursing his coffee while scrolling through messages on his phone. "You're good with him," he said without looking up. "The way you handled the conversation about his mother. He needs to be able to talk about her. The therapist says the same thing." He set down his phone, giving me his full attention. "Doctor, Reeves has been working with Jake since Elena died. He's made progress, but there are still difficult days." "How long has it been?" 3 years, 4 months, 16 days. The precision of his answer revealed how closely he tracked the loss. "She had a brain aneurysm, went to sleep one night and never woke up." The stark brutality of sudden loss hung between us. I thought about Jake's nighttime fears, the way he sometimes checked twice to make sure I was really staying for dinner. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating for both of you." Jake was 4. He kept asking when Mommy was coming home from her trip. James's voice remained steady, but something raw flickered in his pale eyes. It took months to make him understand that she wasn't coming back. "And you? How did you handle it?" "I made sure my son was taken care of. Everything else was secondary." The non-answer told me everything I needed to know. James Moretti had buried his grief in work and responsibility, probably hadn't allowed himself to mourn properly while managing an empire and a grieving child. "Julia," his voice carried a warning. "I'm not looking for therapy or sympathy. I'm telling you this so you understand why Jake responds to you the way he does. He's been surrounded by staff and security guards and business associates. You're the first woman since Elena who's shown him maternal affection." "I care about him," I said simply. "I know. That's what makes this arrangement work." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it automatically. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made my blood run cold. "Pretty house. Pretty life. But we know who you really are, Julia Santos. And we know what you're worth to him." James must have seen the change in my expression, because he was on his feet instantly, moving around the kitchen island to look at my phone. "Who sent this?" His voice was deadly quiet. "I don't know. The number isn't in my contacts." He took the phone from my hands, his jaw tightening as he read the message. When he looked up, his eyes held the cold calculation that reminded me exactly who I was dealing with. "Marcus!" His voice carried through the house with military authority. Marcus appeared within seconds, his expression shifting to high alert when he saw James's face. "We have a problem," James said, showing him the phone. "Someone's made contact with Julia. Trace this number, find out who sent it, and increase security on the property immediately." "Yes, sir." Marcus's eyes met mine briefly, assessing whether I was a threat or a victim. "Miss Santos, have you noticed anyone following you? Any unusual activity around your old apartment?" "No, nothing. I haven't been back there since I moved in here." "We'll check it out," Marcus assured me, then looked back at James. "Should I cancel your meeting this afternoon?" "No, but I want 2 additional men on Jake's security detail, and Julia doesn't leave the property without my permission." The cage door clanged shut with audible finality. I was no longer just a housekeeper with generous benefits. I was under protection, which meant I was also under control. "This is about your business, isn't it?" I asked after Marcus left to implement whatever protocols protected the Moretti family from threats. "Probably. I have competitors who aren't above using leverage to gain advantages. Leverage meaning me, meaning anyone I care about." He moved closer, his presence both comforting and intimidating. "Julia, I need you to understand something. By being part of this household, you've painted a target on yourself. Not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are to Jake, to me. Who am I to you?" The question came out more vulnerable than I'd intended. He studied my face with those penetrating pale eyes, as if weighing how much truth to reveal. You're someone I trust with the most important thing in my world. That makes you valuable. It also makes you dangerous to people who want to hurt me. So what happens now? I become a prisoner in this beautiful house? You become protected. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels like I just traded one kind of cage for another. His expression hardened. The cage you left was poverty and desperation. This cage comes with security guards and a child who adores you. If you can't see the distinction, perhaps you need to reconsider your priorities. The cold dismissal stung, but before I could respond, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message that made my stomach clench. Tell your boyfriend that some debts can't be paid with money, some require blood. James read it over my shoulder, his body going rigid with a fury that radiated heat. That's not about leverage, he said, his voice deadly quiet. That's personal. Personal how? Someone wants me to know they can reach you, that they can reach anyone I care about. He was already moving toward his study, my phone in his hand. Marcus, conference room, now. And get Tony and Vincent here immediately. I followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs. The study transformed from a comfortable office into a command center within minutes. Marcus arrived with two other men I'd seen around the property but never spoken to, their faces grim with professional focus. Show them, James said, handing over my phone. Tony, a compact man with intelligent eyes and silver threading his dark hair, studied the messages with the attention of someone accustomed to analyzing threats. The language is personal, he said after a moment. This isn't business. Someone has a grudge. Against me or against Julia? James asked. Could be either, or both. Tony looked at me. Miss Santos, have you had any problems with ex-boyfriends? Anyone from your past who might hold a grudge? I thought about my dating history, the handful of relationships that had fizzled out due to my work schedule and financial stress. Nothing that would inspire this kind of menace. No one serious. I haven't had time for relationships. Family disputes? Money problems with loan sharks? I don't have any family except my sister in Phoenix, and she wouldn't hurt anyone. As for money problems, I shrugged. I was broke, not involved with criminals. Until now, Vincent pointed out. He was younger than the others, probably early 30s, with the kind of face that could blend into any crowd. Being here makes you a target whether you asked for it or not. Vincent. James's warning was clear. I'm just saying, boss. She's been here 3 weeks. First contact happens now. Could be someone waited to see if this was temporary. Or someone needed time to plan, Marcus added. Professional surveillance takes time to set up. The conversation swirled around me like a foreign language. These men discussed threats and surveillance and protection details with the casual efficiency of people who dealt with violence as part of their daily routine. I want to know who sent these messages within 6 hours, James said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I want to know what they want, who they work for, and how they got Julia's number. And if we can't trace them, Tony asked, then we assume the worst and act accordingly. I didn't ask what acting accordingly meant. I was beginning to understand that in James's world, some questions were better left unasked. After the men left to implement whatever investigative procedures protected the Moretti family, I found myself alone with James in his study. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken implications. I'm sorry, he said finally. I brought this into your life. Did you? Or was I already a target the moment I helped Jake? What do you mean? I mean, maybe this isn't about me being part of your household. Maybe it's about me being the woman who saved your son. He considered this, his pale eyes thoughtful. You think someone was watching that night? Saw you help Jake? I don't know, But the timing is convenient, isn't it? 3 weeks after I move in here, suddenly someone knows how to reach me. You're right. We should have considered that possibility sooner. I should have considered it sooner. He moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where Jake wanted to plant roses for his mother. I've been thinking of you as part of my world, under my protection. I didn't consider that you might have been a target before you ever walked through my door. The admission revealed more than I think he intended. He'd been thinking of me as his responsibility, his to protect and care for. The possessiveness should have alarmed me, but instead it felt like safety. So what happens now? I asked. Now we find out who's threatening you and we eliminate the threat. Eliminate? Whatever it takes, Julia. I won't allow anyone to hurt you or use you to hurt Jake. And if I don't want to be eliminated? If I want to leave? Go back to my old life? Your old life doesn't exist anymore. The moment you saved my son, the moment you walked into this house, you became part of something larger. He turned from the window, his gaze intense. There's no going back, Julia, only forward. Into what? Into being a family, real family, the kind that protects each other no matter what. The weight of that declaration settled over me like a heavy blanket. Family meant belonging, but it also meant obligation. It meant being bound to these people and their dangerous world whether I chose it or not. Jake will be home soon, I said, needing to focus on something concrete. He'll want to work on his science project. And you'll help him plant seeds and chart growth rates, and for a few hours, you'll both forget that there are people in this world who would hurt a child to settle scores with his father. Is that what you want? For us to pretend everything is normal? I want my son to feel safe and loved. I want him to have the childhood his mother would have given him. His voice roughened with emotion. If pretending everything is normal accomplishes that, then yes, that's exactly what I want. I understood then that James Moretti's greatest strength and weakness was the same thing, his love for his son. Everything he did, every decision he made, filtered through that single priority. The messages, I said. If they keep coming, if this escalates, will you tell Jake? Only if I have to. Only if it becomes necessary for his safety. And me? Will you tell me the truth about what you find? Do you want the truth? Or do you want to feel safe? I want both. Then you're going to be disappointed. In my world, you can have safety or truth, but rarely both. The choice he presented felt like a crossroads. I could demand transparency and accept the fear that came with knowledge. Or I could trust him to handle the darkness while I focused on Jake's light. I choose safety, I said finally. But not ignorance. I need to know enough to protect Jake if something happens to you. Nothing will happen to me. You can't guarantee that. No, he agreed. I can't. But I can make sure you're prepared if the worst happens. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening, followed by Jake's voice calling for me. The domestic normalcy felt surreal after discussing threats and elimination and worst-case scenarios. Julia, I'm home. Can we work on my project now? I looked at James, seeing the subtle shift as he transformed from dangerous businessman back into devoted father. Go, he said softly. Help him plant his seeds. Let him be a little boy who believes the world is safe. As I left the study to meet Jake's enthusiasm, I wondered if that was what I was doing too. Planting seeds in dangerous soil, hoping something beautiful would grow despite the darkness surrounding it. Jake's laughter filled the house as we gathered supplies for his project, and for a few hours, I let myself believe that love was enough to keep the monsters at bay. I was learning that sometimes beautiful lies were more valuable than ugly truths. The roses bloomed in defiant beauty against the threat that hung over our carefully constructed family. 2 weeks had passed since the first threatening messages, and Jake's science project had evolved into a full garden that stretched along the south wall of the property. He tended his plants with the devotion of someone who believed in growth and beauty, unaware that his father's men now patrolled the grounds with weapons hidden beneath their jackets. "Look, Julia," Jake called from where he knelt beside his mother's rose bush, his small hands gentle as he examined the blood-red petals. "The roses are perfect today. Do you think Mommy can see them from heaven?" My throat tightened with emotion as I watched him, this innocent child surrounded by love and luxury, but shadowed by dangers he couldn't comprehend. "I think she sees everything you do, sweetheart. And I think she's very proud of how well you're taking care of her flowers." James appeared at the French doors leading to the garden, his suit jacket replaced by rolled sleeves, and an expression softer than any I'd seen him wear in public. The threatening messages had changed something between us, created an intimacy born of shared danger and mutual protection. "How's our gardener today?" he asked, settling on the stone bench beside me. "Daddy, can we plant more roses? I want to make a whole wall of them for Mommy." "We can plant whatever you want," James replied, his voice carrying the indulgent tone he reserved for his son's dreams. As Jake continued his careful examination of each plant, chattering about growth rates and soil composition, I found myself studying James's profile. The afternoon sun highlighted the sharp angles of his face, the worry lines that had deepened over the past 2 weeks despite his efforts to appear unconcerned. "No word on the messages?" I asked quietly. "Nothing concrete. The numbers were bought with cash, the messages sent from burner phones. Professional-grade anonymity. But you have theories." "I always have theories." He turned to meet my gaze, his pale eyes holding secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The question is whether you want to hear them. You said I could choose safety or truth. And you chose safety. I'm reconsidering." Jake's laughter drew our attention as he chased a butterfly through the garden, his joy so pure it was painful to watch. This child who trusted completely, who believed in gardens and roses and forever families, deserved protection from the darkness that followed his father like a shadow. "Julia," James's voice was careful, controlled. "What I'm about to tell you stays between us. Jake can never know." "I understand." 3 years ago, before Elena died, I was involved in a business dispute with a man named Vincent Torino. He wanted to expand his territory into areas I controlled. I refused to negotiate. "What kind of territory?" "The kind that involves products certain people want, but can't legally obtain." His euphemism was clear enough without explicit details. Torino pushed. I pushed back. Things escalated. How much did they escalate? Enough that Torino lost significant resources and several key associates. He blamed me for the collapse of his operation. "Were you responsible?" "Partially. But in my business, when someone threatens what's yours, you don't negotiate. You eliminate the threat." The casual mention of elimination sent a chill through me, but I forced myself to stay focused. "What does this have to do with the messages?" "Torino was arrested 18 months ago on federal charges. He's been in maximum security ever since." James paused, his jaw tightening. "He was released on a technicality 2 weeks ago. The timing wasn't a coincidence. He's coming after you. He's coming after everything I care about. He wants me to feel what he felt when I destroyed his operation." "Everything you care about," I repeated. "Jake and you." The simple word carried weight that made my breath catch. He knows Jake is my weakness, but he also knows that hurting a child brings heat he can't handle. You, however, are a different kind of vulnerability. "What kind?" James was quiet for a long moment, watching Jake collect fallen petals in his small hands. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "The kind that matters more than business, more than territory, or money, or power." The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Whatever was growing between James and me had moved beyond professional obligation or convenience. It had become something real, something worth protecting and worth threatening. "He wants to hurt you through me," I said. "He wants to prove that I'm not untouchable, that the things I love can be taken away. And if he succeeds, he won't." The certainty in James's voice was absolute. "I've spent 3 years building defenses around everything that matters to me. Torino made a mistake coming after my family." Family. The word slipped out before I could stop it. "Yes." His pale eyes met mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "Family." Jake's voice interrupted the moment as he ran toward us, his hands full of rose petals. "Look, I collected the ones that fell so they won't go to waste. Maybe we can make perfume like Mommy used to do." "That's a wonderful idea," I said, accepting his offering. "We'll look up how to do it properly. Can we do it now, please?" James stood, smoothing his son's dark hair. "After dinner, buddy. Julia and I need to finish discussing some grown-up things." "Boring grown-up things?" Jake asked with 7-year-old skepticism. "Very boring," James confirmed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. After Jake ran inside to wash his hands for dinner, James and I remained in the garden as shadows lengthened and the scent of roses grew stronger in the cooling air. "There's more," he said finally. "Something you need to know before you decide whether to stay or leave." "I thought we established that leaving wasn't an option." "It's always an option, Julia. Difficult, dangerous, but still an option." He turned to face me fully. "Torino isn't just threatening you to hurt me. He's threatening you because of who you are." "I don't understand." "The night you found Jake, you were seen. Not just by Jake, not just by my security cameras. Someone else was watching." The garden seemed to grow colder despite the warm evening air. "Who?" "One of Torino's men. They'd been following the team that was supposed to take Jake to safety. When Marco and Tony abandoned him at the bus stop, Torino's people were prepared to take him." "Take him where?" "Somewhere I'd never find him. Somewhere they could use him against me for years." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying if I hadn't helped Jake that night, he'd be gone, dead or worse, and I'd be destroying the city looking for him." "But I did help him. So why is Torino targeting me now?" "Because you ruined his plan. Because you saved Jake before his people could take him. Because you cost him the perfect leverage against me. So this is my fault?" "This is Torino's fault." James's voice carried deadly certainty. "But yes, you painted a target on yourself the moment you chose to help my son instead of walking away." I thought about that night. The rain and Jake's frightened face. The way he'd trusted me completely. Even knowing what I knew now, I couldn't regret that choice. "Would you have done anything differently?" James asked, as if reading my thoughts. "No. I couldn't leave a child alone in that storm. That's what I thought. That's also what makes you dangerous to men like Torino. Because I care about people? Because you act on that caring without calculating the cost. Most people would have called the police and walked away. You took Jake home, fed him, protected him. You made yourself part of his story. And now I'm part of yours. Yes." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining with surprising gentleness. "Julia, I need you to understand what staying means. Not just the luxury and security, but the real cost. Tell me." "It means you'll always be a target. It means Jake's enemies become your enemies. It means living with security protocols and background checks, and the knowledge that violence is always a possibility. And if I leave, Torino still knows who you are. He still blames you for interfering with his plans. Leaving doesn't make you safe. It just makes you vulnerable." The trap was complete and elegant. Staying meant accepting a life of beautiful captivity. Leaving meant abandoning Jake and facing danger without protection. "There's a third option," James said quietly, "which is, we eliminate Torino." The casual way he suggested murder should have horrified me. Instead, I found myself asking, how? Permanently, quietly, in a way that sends a message to anyone else who might consider threatening my family. "Your family meaning Jake and me?" "Yes. And you're telling me this because? Because if we do this, there's no going back. You become complicit in everything I am, everything I do. You become part of my world completely. As opposed to being a kept woman in a gilded cage. As opposed to pretending you don't know what I am or what I'm capable of." I thought about Jake's laughter, his trusting hugs, the way he'd called me family with such certainty. I thought about the roses blooming despite the darkness, about the security of never worrying about money or food or safety. "If something happens to me," I said slowly, "Jake would be alone again." "Nothing will happen to you." "You can't guarantee that." "I can if you let me. By eliminating Torino. By protecting what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed me. Instead, it felt like a warm embrace, the promise of someone who would fight for me the way no one ever had. "Julia." James's voice was softer now, vulnerable in a way I'd rarely heard. "I need you to stay. Not just for Jake, though he needs you more than he's ever needed anyone. I need you to stay." "Why?" "Because somewhere between that first night and now, you became essential. To both of us." The honesty in his admission broke something open in my chest, a wall I'd built to protect myself from hoping for too much. "If I stay," I said carefully, "if I agree to this, what does that make me?" "Mine." The word was soft, but absolute. "Jake's and mine." "And Torino?" "Becomes yesterday's problem." I looked toward the house where Jake was probably helping Maggie set the table for dinner, chattering about his garden and his science project, and the woman he'd decided was family. This child who'd lost so much, who deserved better than to lose someone else. "When?" I asked. "Soon. Before he has a chance to escalate." "Will Jake know?" "Jake will know that the bad people who wanted to hurt our family went away. He'll know he's safe." "And me? What will I know?" "You'll know that I keep my promises. That I protect what I love. Love." The word hung between us, unexamined but undeniable. "Julia!" Jake's voice called from the house. "Dinner's ready, and Maggie made your favorite pasta." "Coming, sweetheart," I called back, then looked at James. "I'll stay. And Torino, do what you have to do." His smile was slow and satisfied, the expression of a man who'd gotten everything he wanted. "Welcome to the family, Julia. Really and truly this time." As we walked toward the house where Jake waited with excited chatter about perfume making and tomorrow's adventures, I realized I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I was no longer an innocent bystander swept up in James Moretti's world. I was a willing participant in it. The roses in our garden would bloom more beautiful than ever, watered by rain and tended by love, while somewhere in the city, Vincent Torino's time was running out. I should have felt guilt or horror at my complicity. Instead, I felt something that might have been relief. Jake would be safe. I would be safe. We would be a family. Everything else was just details. The morning Vincent Torino died dawned clear and bright, with sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows as Jake practiced reading aloud from his favorite book about the brave little mouse. I sat beside him at the breakfast bar, helping with difficult words, while Maggie prepared fresh croissants that filled the house with the scent of butter and promise. James had left before sunrise for what he'd called business meetings. kissing Jake's forehead and touching my hand with fingers that were gentle despite everything those hands were capable of. He'd said nothing about the day's true purpose, but I'd seen it in his eyes, the cold determination that meant someone's story was ending. "Julia, what does courage mean?" Jake asked, pointing to the word on the page. "Courage means being brave when you're scared. It means doing the right thing even when it's hard." "Like when you saved me from the storm?" "Like that, yes." "And like when Daddy protects us from bad people?" The innocent question hit closer to truth than Jake realized. "Yes, sweetheart. Like that too." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and my heart stuttered before I read the message. It was from James, though the number was different from his usual contact. Problem solved. Home for dinner. Tell Jake we're having his favorite. The euphemism was clear enough. Vincent Torino would not be threatening anyone ever again. I should have felt horror at my relief, but instead, I felt only gratitude that the shadow hanging over our family had been lifted. "Who was that?" Jake asked, his young face curious but not concerned. "Your dad. He says he'll be home for dinner and we're having your favorite. Pizza night." Jake's excitement was infectious, his whole face lighting up with joy. "Can we make it ourselves like last time?" "Of course we can." As the day progressed with the normal rhythm of a 7-year-old's schedule, school and homework and garden time, I found myself noticing details with heightened clarity. The way Jake hummed while he watered his roses, completely unconscious of the violence that had been committed to preserve his innocent world. The careful attention of the security guards who now smiled more easily. Their vigilance relaxed for the first time in weeks. The way I moved through the house with a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with employment contracts and everything to do with the roots I'd grown in this beautiful, dangerous soil. James returned at 6:30, appearing in the kitchen where Jake and I were assembling pizza toppings with serious concentration. He looked the same as always, impeccably dressed and completely controlled. No sign that he'd spent the day eliminating threats to his family's safety. "How are my favorite chefs?" he asked, dropping a kiss on Jake's head before his eyes met mine across the kitchen island. "We're making 3 kinds, Jake announced. "Pepperoni for me, veggie for Julia, and the one with weird cheese that you like." "Gorgonzola," James corrected with a smile. "And it's not weird, it's sophisticated." "It smells funny," Jake insisted, making James laugh with genuine amusement. The domesticity of the scene was surreal given what I knew had transpired during the day. This man who'd probably ordered someone's death before lunch was now debating pizza toppings with his 7-year-old son, as if murder was just another item on his business calendar. "Julia helped me practice reading today," Jake continued, rolling his small portion of dough with intense concentration. "I read the whole chapter about the mouse and the cat." "That's excellent. What happened in the chapter?" "The mouse was scared, but he saved all his friends anyway. Julia says that's what courage means." James's pale eyes found mine again, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "Julia's right. True courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about acting despite the fear." "Are you ever scared, Daddy?" "Sometimes." "What scares you?" "Losing the people I love most." The simple honesty of his answer, delivered while he helped his son arrange pepperoni slices, revealed more about James Moretti than any FBI profile ever could. Everything he did, every violent choice he made, filtered through that single driving fear. After dinner, while Jake was engrossed in a movie, James and I found ourselves alone on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The roses we'd planted with such hope were thriving in the evening air, their fragrance mixing with the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of the city beyond our walls. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling beside me on the stone bench where we'd shared so many conversations. "Different." "How so?" I thought about the relief I'd felt at his text, the way I'd moved through the day knowing that the threat to our family had been eliminated. Like I've crossed a line I can't uncross. Regrets? No. That's what scares me. Why? Because a month ago, I would have been horrified by what happened today. Now I'm just grateful that Jake is safe. You're protecting someone you love. That changes everything. Does it? Or does it just make the choices easier to rationalize? James was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the gardens where Jake had planted hope in the form of roses for a mother he barely remembered. I've been making difficult choices for a long time, Julia. The only thing that makes them bearable is knowing they serve a purpose larger than myself. Jake, you, the family we've built together. Even if that family is built on violence. Especially then. The world is a violent place. The only choice is whether you're strong enough to meet that violence on your own terms. And today? Today we met it on our terms. A movement at the French doors caught our attention, and Jake appeared in his Spider-Man pajamas, his dark hair damp from his bath. I finished my movie, he announced. Can Julia read me a story? Of course, sweetheart, I said, standing to follow him inside. The one about the brave mouse again? He asked hopefully. Whichever one you want. As we headed upstairs to his room, I felt James's gaze following us, and I understood that this too was part of his protection. These moments of ordinary family life, the bedtime stories and garden projects and pizza nights that made everything else worthwhile. Jake's room was a sanctuary of childhood innocence, filled with books and toys and artwork he'd created at school. He settled into his bed with the expectant joy of a child who knew he was loved and safe, surrounded by adults who would do anything to keep him that way. Julia, he said, as I opened his favorite book, are you going to stay forever? Forever is a very long time, Jake, but you want to, right? You love being part of our family? The innocent question required an honest answer, and as I looked at his trusting face, I realized the truth had been growing inside me for weeks. Yes, sweetheart, I love being part of your family. Good. Because Daddy loves you too, I can tell. Can you? He looks at you the way he looked at Mommy in the pictures, like you're the most important person in the whole world. Children saw things adults tried to hide, and Jake's observation hit closer to truth than I was ready to examine. Whatever was growing between James and me had moved far beyond convenience or protection. Let's read our story, I said, deflecting from emotions too complex for bedtime conversations. After Jake fell asleep, I made my way back downstairs to find James in his study, surrounded by papers and the quiet efficiency of a man managing an empire. He looked up as I entered, setting aside whatever document he'd been reviewing. He settled, fast asleep. He asked if I was staying forever. What did you tell him? That forever is a long time. But not that you're leaving. No, not that I'm leaving. James leaned back in his chair, studying me with those pale eyes that saw too much. Because you're not leaving. How can you be so certain? Because you've already chosen, Julia. Maybe not consciously, maybe not all at once, but you've chosen us. This family, this life, this future we're building together. Even knowing what it costs? Especially knowing what it costs. I moved closer to his desk, running my fingers along the polished wood that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Everything in this house spoke of power and wealth, and the violence that protected both. 3 months ago, I was invisible. Just another poor woman working multiple jobs to survive. Now you're Julia Moretti. The name stopped me cold. I never said I was taking your name. Didn't you? His smile was small but confident. Jake calls you family. I call you family. The staff treats you as family. When people look at you, they see James Moretti's woman, under his protection and bearing his authority. And if I don't want that authority? Then you wouldn't have agreed to Torino's elimination. You wouldn't have stayed when you learned what I am. You wouldn't be here now, talking about forevers with my son. Your son who thinks you're in the business of protecting people. I am in the business of protecting people. The people who matter to me. And everyone else? Everyone else is secondary. The casual dismissal of humanity beyond his inner circle should have chilled me. Instead, I found it oddly comforting. In James's world, I wasn't everyone else. I was someone who mattered, someone worth protecting and fighting for. Julia. His voice was softer now, vulnerable in the way it only became when we were alone. I need you to understand something. What? This isn't just about Jake anymore. Yes, he needs you, loves you, sees you as the mother he lost. But this is also about us. Us? You and me. What's growing between us? What's been growing since that first night when you chose to save my son instead of protecting yourself? And what is growing between us? He stood, moving around the desk to stand close enough that I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of silver in his pale eyes. Love, he said simply. Real, complicated, dangerous love. James. I know it's not simple. I know I'm not an easy man to love. I know my world is dark and violent, and nothing like the life you imagined for yourself. No, it's not. But I also know that when you look at Jake, you see a son. When you look at this house, you see a home. And when you look at me. He paused, studying my face. When you look at me, you see something worth staying for. Do I? You tell me. I thought about the man who'd appeared in my life like a storm, who'd offered security and purpose and a family I'd never dared to hope for. I thought about the way he loved his son with fierce devotion, the way he'd protected me without question, the way he'd eliminated threats to our happiness with the same casual efficiency others use to buy groceries. I see a man who would do anything for the people he loves, I said quietly. I see someone who's built an empire on violence, but who makes pancakes with his son on Sunday mornings. I see. What? Someone I could love completely, if I let myself. Then let yourself. And if it destroys me, then I'll put you back together, again and again, as many times as necessary. The promise was absolute, delivered with the certainty of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. In anyone else, such confidence would have seemed like arrogance. In James Moretti, it simply sounded like truth. There would be conditions, I said. Name them. Jake comes first, always. No matter what your business requires, no matter who threatens what, Jake's welfare is the priority. Agreed. And honesty. Not about everything. Not about the details I don't need to know. But about anything that affects our family. Our family. Yes. Our family. His smile was slow and satisfied. The expression of a man who'd won something precious. Is that all? One more thing. Which is, I want the roses Jake planted to bloom every year. I want him to have that connection to his mother. That promise that beautiful things can grow even in dark soil. Done. Then yes, James. I'll stay. Forever, if you'll have me. I'll have you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For as long as you'll let me. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. But when I responded, when I let myself fall into the dangerous promise of loving James Moretti completely, it deepened into something that felt like claiming and being claimed in return. When we broke apart, both breathing harder, he rested his forehead against mine. Welcome home, Julia. I've been home for weeks, I replied. I just didn't know it yet. Later that night, as I lay in the bed that had become mine in the house that had become ours, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. From a woman invisible in her gray cleaning uniform to the center of a powerful man's world. From struggling to survive to being fought for and protected and loved. Down the hall, Jake slept peacefully in his room full of toys and dreams, secure in the knowledge that his family was complete and safe. Outside our windows, the roses we'd planted together grew stronger in the darkness, their roots deepening in soil nourished by hope and protected by whatever violence was necessary to preserve beauty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to navigate, new choices that would test the strength of what we'd built together. But tonight, we were simply a family, bound by love and protected by the absolute devotion of a man who would burn the world down before allowing harm to touch what was his. I was Julia Moretti in everything but name, and someday soon, if I chose it, even that would be true. The thought should have terrified me, this complete transformation from who I'd been to who I was becoming. Instead, it felt like coming home. The storm that had brought Jake into my life had passed, but it had left behind something precious in its wake. A family forged in darkness, but illuminated by love, protected by violence, but nurtured by tenderness, built on dangerous ground, but strong enough to weather any tempest. As sleep claimed me, I could smell the roses blooming in our garden, their fragrance carrying promises of beauty that would endure long after the storms had passed. We were home. We were safe. We were forever. And that was worth everything it had cost to get here.